Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Dojo Live. I'm Tulio Siragusa, joined today by my co-host Kim Lantis and Carlos Ponce. Hi, guys. Welcome back.
Thank you,
This
guys.
is our first interview of 2021. We call it an interview, but it's really a nice conversation amongst friends, getting to know each other. And with that being said, we have our guest today who's broadcasting from San Francisco, Yasyf Mohamedali from SIM. Hi, Yasyf. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
So we're looking forward to an interesting conversation today about security. The impact has been far and wide this past year, a lot of hacks, etc. But before we go into the topic of conversation, let's get to know you a little bit. If you could be so kind to introduce yourself, tell the audience a little about yourself. Thanks.
Yeah, so my name is Yasyf. I'm the CEO of a cybersecurity company called SIM. So my background is as a software engineer. I spent the last several years actually working in a different field. So I was running an engineering team at a healthcare company where we were building a communication platform for the people who take care of the poorest, sickest patients in the US. So probably the most rewarding job I'll ever have in my career. It was pretty incredible. Got the privilege of working with that team and building out that platform and working to improve the lives of many patients for several years. And throughout that journey, kind of had a lot of interesting challenges around building software in a heavily regulated space where security and compliance matter a lot, which kind of inspired me to kind of discover some of the problems that we're now trying to tackle at SIM.
Excellent. So let's talk about SIM a little bit. What gave birth to this idea? What do you guys do specifically?
Yeah, totally. So what we do at SIM is we basically remove the need for software development teams to have this struggle that they normally have, where they have this tension between either moving really fast and building a lot of things very fast, or being very secure and following all the kind of rules around compliance and security. So, right now it's like you can either do one or the other, but doing both is kind of very difficult. Whereas what SIM does is we take all of the work required to move fast and yet still be secure, the same work that every company right now has to do themselves, and we do it all one time in a kind of centralized way. And then we give these companies a toolkit to let them kind of use our tools instead of building their own, so that they can keep moving fast, keep doing a lot of innovation, building a lot of cool products without having to slow down, but also without having to compromise on their security and on their kind of compliance posture.
So before we go into the topic, there's a lot of players in this space, obviously. What is unique about you guys?
I'm glad you asked. This is one of my favorite questions. There are a lot of people working in cybersecurity, building all sorts of different products, trying to help people be more secure. What's really unique about us is we're very focused on the developers, on the engineering team. So other products in the space will either kind of be a black box solution that you kind of roll out but don't really have the ability to tweak or configure, or it'll be very configurable but kind of more legacy software that's often kind of built for a world where IT departments are the ones controlling kind of security and managing that stuff. But these days, what you're seeing more and more is the actual developers who are building products are the ones that are really focused on security and privacy and the integrity of data. And there aren't a lot of tools for those teams specifically and built for those teams to kind of manage that process. So what ends up happening is other people in the space end up putting out these products which get the job done, but are very frustrating for the engineers and the developers who are involved in building products. And so we're one of the first people in the scenes that will actually build a toolkit specifically for those people.
Got it. Very good. So let's go right into the topic today. Kim, would you please introduce the topic today?
Sure. Thank you, Tulio, and welcome to the show, Yasyf. So today's topic, as chosen by you, is developers and security, a love-hate relationship. Noting that 2020 was marred with a myriad of cybersecurity incidents, ranging from Twitter all the way to SolarWinds, and you want to address some cultural shifts that can happen to perhaps and hopefully avoid this in 2021. So my question for you is, yes, what are these cultural shifts? Tall order. I think the first shift that you're mentioning is get security in the developer's hands, right? Is that a cultural shift that you're referring to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's this notion of developers having to kind of reclaim security in a way that they haven't really done before. And so, the way I kind of compare this is if you look at kind of the past, you saw a very similar trend with kind of infrastructure and the people who are kind of taking the code that's written for a product and putting it out into the world, kind of like actually getting it deployed. And that used to be IT that did this. They were kind of in charge of managing the servers and getting everything out there. But there's this kind of revolution, this field called Devops kind of popped up where engineers were actually saying like, no, this is ours. Like we actually want to own this process of taking code from just being written all the way to being live as a product. And in order to do that, we had to build a whole set of tools, and we still are building this like rich set of tools to empower these engineers to actually reclaim kind of infrastructure and deployment. And now we're seeing something very similar in security, where I think you see these engineers and these development teams who want to reclaim kind of this notion of security. And we need to kind of do some cultural shifts to help them do that. And part of that is kind of equipping them with the right tools.
Very good. So where does that cultural shift need to take place? Is it from like the project management level, from the CTO level, from the engineers themselves, all of the above?
Yeah, I think it's every part of that stack. It's everything from the engineers who are writing the code, who actually are now realizing, these considerations of who can access the data and are there any vulnerabilities or ways people kind of get around our constraints and access data. Historically, that was kind of left to someone else, but I think we're seeing more and more that model doesn't work. So I think it starts with the engineers. And again, to be able to do that, it's really unfair to just say that the engineers need to start caring about this whole new domain and learn all this stuff. Like we have to give them the right tools to equip them to kind of properly own that. And that's exactly what SIM is trying to do. So I think that's the first level. I think it also gets worked into the project management, the product management. People need to budget for time and capacity to look at this stuff. It can't be an afterthought. It's got to be kind of baked into what everyone's doing. And I think also at the kind of executive level, the VP and the C-suite level, people have to start really baking this into something they care about as one of their fundamental goals. I think every company should have an OKR this year of kind of doing a overhaul of their kind of security culture, because looking at what every other, tech company out there has struggled with in the past year, it's the fact this is always an afterthought, and there, a lot of that comes top down. And so I think having this executive leadership where people are saying, no, this is a priority for us. This is actually going to be something we evaluate, internally, is our security posture and how enabled people feel at kind of tackling those problems. I think that starts at the top.
So I have a question, Yasyf. In construction business, right, there's a big push for it's everyone's job. Safety is everyone's job, right? Yeah. And they track how many days have gone by from the last incident, right? So there's this movement that has enhanced everyone's awareness to take the right precautions to keep everyone else safe, not just yourself, but everyone else. So how do you think we can introduce that to the developers world? Because what you're basically saying is it's everyone's job. Security is everyone's job, right? So what are some of the methods to bring about that change?
I love that analogy so much. The kind of like days since incident kind of thing, this mindset of like, it's everyone's job to kind of keep everyone safe. I think the same thing really applies around security. I think it's everyone's job to be thinking about security. And I like the kind of very blameless, engineers are big on doing kind of blameless retros and thinking about how can we build systems that prevent us from making mistakes in the first place, as opposed to just pointing fingers and saying someone made a mistake. And so I like that mindset of kind of saying, okay, well, how can we bring that to security? How can we bring this and make it so it's everyone's responsibility? And I think, a couple of things. One is, I think, just an education thing, right? Where we have to start showing everyone that, hey, you see these big hacks on the news, and you see, hey, look, this happened to Twitter, this happened to SolarWinds, this happened to Garmin, but what people don't realize is for the big hack or incident you see in the news, there's 10 smaller ones that people see kind of that happen every day, whether it's a small breach or a small incident. And so people always think, oh, it only happens to big companies. I think we have to really let people understand that this could happen to anyone. It could happen to you. It might have already happened to you. And so it's kind of education thing of, hey, this is relevant to you too, but also it's very much in your power to fix, right? I think one of the other problems is people see security as this big, scary thing where it's kind of all or nothing. In reality, it's really small tweaks here and there, right? There's little kind of best practices you can adopt, little parts of your process you can tweak. And I think by slowly introducing those, and again, it's really unfair to ask people to just do that point blank, right? You have to give them the tools, equip them to actually be able to do this. But by giving people the right tools and by baking this into the culture slowly, I think you can actually make a small transition which has a very large impact.
Right. It's one of the first things that came to my mind was you kept talking about reclaiming in the sense of ownership. But the first thing that is, that sounds scary. And this idea of, I think it's tempting for everybody to sort of stick their head in a hole like an ostrich. And if it's everybody's problem, it's nobody's problem. And
right.
And you mentioned these baby steps and these things that we could do to start creating this. So one of those is the tools. So if you wouldn't mind sharing, what exactly are those tools? SIM, of course. What else might we put in our tool set? And what are these potential steps that we could start to make to encourage our developers and everyone else to take the ownership of something that's not going away, it's present, something which I find funny, right? If it's security being an afterthought when it's always going to need to be there. So what are these steps?
Yeah.
Keep in mind we have almost 5,000 developers worldwide, so we're taking notes.
Awesome.
No pressure. No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure at all. On the tools front, there's kind of three buckets of tools I think people start investing in. One is just kind of better tools around detecting, kind of understanding when something has gone wrong. I mean, one of the scary things we see in the news all the time is like, oh man, this hack happened and we're finding out about it 6 months later or a year later. And so being able to kind of have better kind of monitoring and scanning, kind of understanding like, hey, what's actually happening in our system, I think is something people are investing a lot in. And I think it's starting to normalize using those tools. And again, not making a scary thing, right? Like shifting that culture a little bit. It's like right now, when you see something wrong, it's kind of like, oh man, if I report this, it's like something really bad. Lowering that kind of barrier to be like, oh, it's really normal that like we're constantly monitoring, we're constantly alerting on these things. And also being smart, I think the flip side of that problem is a lot of companies experience alert fatigue. And so what you see is a lot of companies now, companies that do kind of alert management, so you have companies like Sentry or PagerDuty or other companies that rolling out a lot of tools to help combat this alert fatigue and understand like when I receive an alert, is it actually relevant or is it kind of just noise? I think that's the first bucket of tools people need to start investing more in and normalizing the use of. The second, I think, is being, there's this notion of security of kind of like shift left, which basically just means like take things from being reactive to proactive. And in that sense, there's a lot of really cool tools out there that will actually integrate into the software development lifecycle and start proactively saying, hey, this infrastructure change you're about to make, it's insecure, or this kind of activity you're about to do would actually expose this issue. And so starting to kind of be more almost proactive and bake it into the actual software development lifecycle, I think is really important as a set of tools. And then the third set of tools, which is primarily where SIM focuses, is actually equipping developers with the frameworks and the tool chain they need to bake this into at a workflow level and to kind of lower the barrier to saying, actually, if we just follow our standard process, then it's very hard to shoot ourselves in the foot. So it's notion of kind of like putting up guardrails, but specifically putting up guardrails that walk the line of not being obtrusive to standard workflows while still being effective at kind of enforcing policy. I think that's really important. And to get there, we need to have tools that actually, lend themselves to the culture and the policies and the other pieces of software being used at different companies, which means they have to be highly customizable. They can't just be these clunky systems we've used in the past.
Yasyf, I have a question for you, and please consider that in this conversation, I am the layman. So please, in that sense, let's just try to use understandable words that will not require me extra effort.
Deal.
Yeah. Okay. No. Well, the thing is, I had a conversation, a DojoLIVE conversation a while ago with a couple of gentlemen who represented a cybersecurity company called SimSpace. And because of the roles and what they did and the types of contracts that they had, I believe, if I recall correctly, they even had a contract with the Defense Department. So it was a very high-end type of scenario, so to speak. So in that conversation, I remember hearing concepts that, to me, they're still on the complex end. But I would like your opinion about your industry, where you see these areas from your perspective. I mean, they even covered about quantum computing, cryptography frameworks, and self-spawning AI, and neural networks. So these were very, very complex, high-end type of scenarios and technologies. Where do you see these types of technologies in your space, if applicable?
It's really interesting. I think there's been a lot of really cool activity in the space of really fancy technologies, right? People doing all this machine learning, neural nets, and really fancy stuff like that. And I think, and quantum computing, encryption, all of that. And so I guess two answers. One is that I don't see those things as mutually exclusive to the stuff we've been talking about, in that you still want to do everything you can to make sure your kind of pipes are protected. The way data is flowing is all encrypted properly to make sure you're doing really smart kind of detection of stuff. The machine learning kind of flows into those kind of models we were talking about earlier around avoiding alert fatigue and making sure that you're actually getting alerted for things happening. So I see all these technologies as kind of the backbone, which are kind of enabling the workflows and the use cases I've been describing. But it's like a technology by itself, like this kind of fundamental technology, isn't what solves the problem. It's a tool you can use to solve the problem. And so I kind of see them as a different layer of the stack, kind of the more building block. The other piece I'll say, though, is that in addition to all this really fancy stuff helping a lot and enabling a lot of the stuff I've described, it often comes down to pretty simple changes to actually get that. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit when it comes to security, where people see all these really exciting, glamorous kind of technologies to use, but actually making those slight cultural shifts, giving people the tools to provide even light guardrails without getting in the way, making security something that's something people think about with every change they make to a code base. Those little things actually go a very long way. And for a lot of the hacks we see, none of this fancy stuff would have helped. It would have helped with remediating and with detecting, but it wouldn't have helped actually avoiding the problem. For a lot of what we've seen, it's actually, like many things in life, doesn't need to be over-engineered. There are very simple, subtle things you can do, which actually get you pretty far.
Okay, thank you, Yasyf.
So when it comes to cultural shift, do you suggest, because the mindset is often, do you want speed or do you want it to be secure?
Yeah.
Right? There's this sort of choice you have to make. And it's a mindset that's ingrained even at the very beginning of someone learning to code, right? So are there any efforts that need to be made even at the educational level to rewire the thinking around this?
So I think there's two big issues, like two misconceptions I think a lot of developers, including myself, in the past, have around security compliance. One is this notion of there's a choice you have to make. You either be secure or you move fast. And, that's been true for a very long time. But I think with the advent of tools like SIM and a bunch of other companies in our space, we are now doing the work of building software that eliminates that tension. With our software, or other pieces of software, you no longer have to make that choice. So part of this is just an education thing, getting out there hey, you don't have to decide between one or the other anymore. And a lot of the customers we talk to, that's kind of a light bulb moment where it's oh, hey, I get it now. I'm still in this mindset of I have to do one or the other, but actually I can have my cake and eat it too. So that's more of, I think, a problem I think companies have to solve, where it's they have to get their products out there and say, hey, you can pay for the software and avoid that trade-off. The other piece, which I think is more fundamental education, is a lot of engineers, I think, conflate security with compliance. And compliance has almost been this bad word where it's it's a chore, it gets in your way, it slows you down. People look at it like they see the TSA fanfare at airports. It's security theater, it's not actual security. And I think, unfortunately, historically, a lot of compliance has been that way. But what you're seeing is a shift kind of on that side of the house as well, where, compliance is now, I almost see compliance as a sales enabler, right? It's how do you instill trust in your customers? How do you get people to understand that you are doing everything you say you're doing and that they can trust you with their data and that you're secure, less than let's just check these boxes, let's just do this security theater. So I think that shift is happening, and it's important for that shift to continue, but equally important is starting to educate engineers that, hey, this kind of security compliance thing, it's not just BS that gets in your way, it's something that actually can create a lot of value for you and your business.
So let me play devil's advocate here a little bit.
Okay.
Once the product is built, then it's the job of the security officer in the organization to ensure that it can't be hacked, right? At least that's the mindset today, right? So why do I need to secure it while I'm building the source code? It's what needs to be secured is once it's in production, right?
Yep. So
what's your argument against that?
I mean, I think the proof is in the pudding, because that's been the exact mindset we've had for years. And I mean, look at the last year, right? Look at all the terrible damage that was done by these breaches and these hacks. That's directly a result of this kind of like not my problem mindset, right? Like it's, yes, companies have CISOs, they have security officers, they have people who have an executive responsibility for some of these functions, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to bake this into your culture and your everyday decision making, because things slip through cracks, and unless it's kind of on everyone's mind, I think that mindset you're describing, you're absolutely right. That's been how people have been thinking about it, but I mean, it hasn't served us very well, right? So we can either keep experiencing those downsides, or we can do something about it and change it.
Yeah, definitely a cultural shift. Kim, you had a question, I think.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'm wondering, a lot of today's conversation is about what to do. But my question for you now is what not to do. So you kind of mentioned this change in mind shift, but what should we stop doing?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing we need to stop doing is the last point you touched on there, which is like thinking about security as this chore, as this like security theater, right? And it's equally the fault of the people who were actually participating in security theater as it was, us engineers for not building the tools we need to kind of like actually think about security as a first principles thing. But I think it's this really toxic mindset of like compliance being a bad word, security being like a not my problem kind of thing. Like it propagates, right? And so I think that's the first thing we have to stop doing, is kind of just like disparaging this whole side of what we're building as something we can just write off. It's not, security is not just a chore. Compliance is not just theater. That may have been the case in the past, but the world is changing, and we need to start taking it really seriously. And that change comes internally, right? Like if we start treating this as a real thing that we take seriously and that we build tooling and support and guardrails around, then that is how future generations will look at it. And so I think there's a bit of just like a standing up and doing the right thing that has to be done there. And part of that is putting a stop to this kind of toxic mindset of just like, oh, this is just something that gets in my way.
That's interesting. It's kind of like wearing masks. Some people wear them under the nose. You might as well not even wear one. It's not doing anything.
Right.
Don't just do it because the requirement is that you wear one. Wear one because it's got some effect, right?
Exactly. And that's a really good point, because historically, some of the security and compliance stuff, it didn't have an effect, right? Customers were just checking the boxes. You were just checking the boxes. It didn't actually matter. And so it's understandable this mindset developed. But what you're seeing, I think what you're seeing now is a shift where people buying software actually care a lot about trust and security in a way they didn't before. So all of a sudden, this stuff is now really valuable, right? All of a sudden now you have the VP of engineering who has not just the CISO, but the CTO, the CRO, and the CEO also breathing down their necks about security, because all of a sudden customers care about this, right? I think it's coming from like a few major shifts. One is like new regulations. So you have like things like GDPR and CCPA coming out, which actually give a legal basis for caring about the stuff. The second thing I think you see is a trend of larger companies passing on their kind of security compliance burdens to smaller companies. So now every small, B2B SaaS company on the planet has to get their SOC 2 audit and care and understand what that is. And the third, I think, is a genuine cultural shift, both from seeing the results of all these breaches, but also, it's like there are people out there, it's like the reason Apple is really popular and Facebook is not, because Apple takes users' privacy really seriously and Facebook doesn't. And we're seeing this cultural shift even in the broader population of people caring about trust and privacy. And so I think those three factors are all feeding into this larger trend of there's actually value in investing in this stuff now. And so it's no longer just, putting the mask on because someone told you to. It's putting the mask on because it saves lives.
Well, we're coming up. Exactly. We're coming up on time. Let's shift a little bit with the time that we have left to talk about what it's been like building this business, which requires re-educating a lot of your customer base and encouraging them to take this more seriously and not just pay lip service to or theatrics, as you mentioned. What kind of people end up joining your organization? You guys are disrupting and introducing something that requires some education and in some cases, some arguments to get people to see the light. What's your culture like to bring people that have that mindset?
Yeah, so I think I'll answer the last part first. And the culture really, we really try to honor and do right by the people we serve, which is these engineering teams. I think it's there is this part that you mentioned around helping people understand that compliance and security is no longer just theater. But I think it's also, we never want to blame our users and our customers. It's not their fault the culture evolved this way. It was, it was a valid way of thinking in the past, I think. And also they didn't have the tools they need. And so we try to have this culture of kind of really empowering and supporting development teams, but not blaming them for their current status quo. And the other part of that kind of culture and education there is, unfortunately, the tools that have been kind of put out there to date are really not helping the problem, right? You either have paternalistic tools that try to do everything for you and aren't customizable or flexible at all and get in your way. And so no wonder people don't like those. On the other hand, you have people encouraging everyone to build everything yourself, build everything in-house. And that's just not feasible. You then end up with the be secure versus go fast. You can't have both. So part of that culture of kind of empowering and lifting up and supporting the developers we work with and helping them understand that, hey, you can actually have your cake and eat it too, and we can give you the tools to do that with is kind of striking that balance of internally making sure we're always building toolkits and frameworks that are that middle ground, that are powerful but flexible and never get in your way. And the kind of people we end up attracting to join the team are similar. They're often developers and people who have experienced these problems before. Getting people to join the team is kind of fun when you get to talk to people and say hey, here's the problem we solve, and they say, oh man, I felt that in my last job. It just got something kind of clicks right away for people who have been in and around this stuff. And so that's really exciting to be say okay, you've experienced this. Now here's the solution we're bringing to the table, but here's this cultural shift we're bringing along with it to really empower people. And this notion of kind of putting guardrails in place that are flexible, strike the middle ground, and helping kind of codify everything so computers can kind of help humans accomplish their goals rather than just replacing humans or disparage them or something. And so I think that mindset really vibes with the people we bring on who have experienced this trade-off in the past. And so a lot of our team ends up being people who are very representative of our customers, which I think is really cool.
I like it. Sounds like a lot of empathy instead of shaming people into changing, right?
Exactly.
I love it. It's not your fault. It is, but
Exactly.
It's not their fault, right? Give them the right tools.
Exactly.
And giving meaning to what it is that they're doing, right? So
Absolutely.
wow, this is a real problem, and I'm helping solve this.
And connecting it with problems people have felt in their past, because as engineers and developers, we've all been there. We've all felt this, and I don't want to just fix this for the healthcare companies and for the high compliance companies out there. I want this to be something that's easy for everyone to kind of take advantage of. We want to be the tool for every company, and so that's kind of really baked into what we're doing.
Yep.
Well, yes, it's been great to have you as our guest. Stay with us as we wrap up, and we'll stay in touch with you for sure to see how you progress along, and maybe we'll have you back a little bit later, maybe in a year or what have you, to get a use case from you and see where you're at. So thank you for joining us. Just stay with us as we wrap up. Carlos, what do we got coming up? I think we have another show this week on Thursday, right?
Absolutely, Tulio. Right here on DojoLIVE at noon, we'll be speaking with Anisha Patel, the Senior Director of Customer Success and Management at Cisco. And the topic is going to be customer experience, the new era of customer success. We're going to be speaking about or answering the question on how to deliver true customer success and how it goes beyond any specific function and requires company-wide transformation. So I really look forward to this conversation on Thursday at noon Pacific with Anisha Patel from Cisco. That's
Great.
What we have.
It'll be interesting. And until then, stay safe, everyone, and see you again soon at noon on Thursday.